Hello and welcome to Leadership Pathway. I'm the co-founder, Dave Miller. At least once a month, we get together and talk to some of the finest minds in leadership.
And none of them were available, and so it's me today. That's how this works.
And that's his best Dave Miller impersonation. Although he did it with way too much energy. I always have to give a shout out to Norton Creative. I'll drop the link in the show notes. They make all this possible. Really thrilled and always happy to talk about them for any web and social media needs you have. Click on them. Talk to Jonathan Norton. He's the best. Okay.
Yeah, good guy.
We have to talk as fast as possible today because we have a Canadian, a very hyper Canadian on with us. We're going through these 7. We believe that at Leadership Pathway, we're all about helping churches find and support and hang on to young leaders. And there's 7 things that really have to be apparent in when you're doing leadership development with this generation. And one of them, we talk about best practices. And there's no more best practices person that I know to have on Rich Birch of Unseminary. Welcome.
I'm so honored to be here. Listen, I'm a fan. I love what Leadership Pathway does. I think, this is a whole sidebar conversation, but I've been tracking closely all these statistics that show about Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and their return to the church, and how all that trend is turned around, and in a positive way, or it's at least the negative trend has stopped, is maybe a better way to say it statistically. Right. But the amazing thing about that is it's going to require, I think, a brand new way to think about leadership development for Gen Z and beyond. What you guys like you and me, men of a certain age, we need to hand this thing off to the next generation. And I love that you're not just talking about it, you guys are actually doing it. So I'm happy to be here today and offer whatever help I can.
Well, great. I think we're needed because honestly, Rich, men of a certain age of my age, most of them do talk about legacy. They are interested in this topic. They really, but the 35-year-olds, it's not the super old people like me. I'm not gonna lump you with me. It's not my peers that roll their eyes and say kids these days. Most of the time in our work, we're finding it's the 30-something-year-old who was thrown in the deep end and just worked and stayed with it. And for a number of reasons, probably both good and bad, it's a whole nother topic probably for us someday. They're still there a decade later, and you hand them a 20 to 25-year-old, and they're like, oh my goodness, no one ever did this for me. That's why we're talking today. Right. And so all of these ingredients that go into baking this cake up for leadership development, one of them is best practices. But before we get there, I always like to ask our guests, tell us, who was Rich Birch and what were you doing age 18 to 25? Because that's the age group we're always centered on. I think the things that go on in that era kind of form us for the long haul. I'd like to hear.
Well, there's a lot there for sure, but I would say there were a couple pivotal moments germane to that time frame in my life. Jermaine Jackson, that were important to me in that time frame.
A J or a G?
I think it's with a G. It's like
smart. We should have you back for the week on education. No.
So the couple things in that time period. So and this is like right down your people are going to say, I can't believe Dave didn't set me up for this. This is literally what happened to me. I was in high school. I had that call to be like, I felt like, oh, I should go into ministry. Like I really think this is what I should do. So I went to a great school. Tyndale University, great school, and to name them, they're great people, Canadian school. And at the time, they're like, it wasn't even internship. It was like placement, community placement or church placement thing was in your last year. So that was the first time that you got to, actually engage in a church. And I did ministry stuff in school, and it was a great experience. And I ended up with an incredible mentor. At a great church. This leader, name still a friend of mine today. Guy's name is Laird Crump. That's his name, real name. That's not like from a Harry Potter book. That's like his real name.
This is in Toronto.
You're in Toronto, okay. And I have very distinct memories I loved Laird, still love Laird, think he's a great leader, but very quickly, I like within days of watching him on in my senior year, I was like, oh, I don't want to do what he does. Like that's not the job I want. Right. That's not who I saw myself as. Like, oh, like I didn't have these words at the time, but like I was an innovator. I wanted to try new things. Where he was like very pastoral.
What kind of high school kid were you, Rich? Were you a rebel, or were you like I was first to youth group setting up the chairs?
I was good question. I was one of the cool kids in the debate club and the drama team. Those were all the cool kids in my high school.
Who told you that?
Yeah, Yeah, that's like an ongoing joke with my wife and I. Because
we have a video clip of you in high school. That would be great.
My wife was sports girl, which she hates it when I call her that. But she was literally like she got the Letterman jacket, literally the Letterman jacket with the senior letter, and like was super, sporty. And I was literally at the debate club, drama club. That was my thing. Active youth grouper, like loved it. Was on the leadership team at the youth group, all that kind of stuff.
Church rat.
100%. Yeah, I loved it.
Okay,
and so yeah, it was a shock to me, and so I came out of school and I was like, I still felt like I wanted to go into ministry stuff, but didn't really want to go the traditional route. I was like, I don't think this is going to be me. And so I went into a couple years of what so many people do. It's like, well, I'm going to try a whole bunch of different things. So like, I was like, try this. I worked in a camp for a while. I worked, I started a .com, and then I was like, this was back when that was cool.
Did what?
.com we did content aggregation. So we took, at that point, this was like even RSS, which is at the core of like how podcasts are shared, is before that even existed. Okay. We would take content. The problem was there were content providers who made content. They weren't getting much traffic on their sites. And then there were ISPs. You remember them? Internet service providers. They had a ton of traffic. So we took content from these people, passed it off, and put it onto ISP site, and then created a bit of value in between those things. We went the .com to .bomb world, like so many did. But then I was working part-time at a church as a youth guy, and then full-time at there, and full-time trying to do both basically. So it was, and basically through all of that, I ended up at a church, fantastic church, great leader, very similar leader to Laird. And that experience, I would say, was fairly negative. I'm not going to name him or the church because it was actually a fairly negative experience. Like, got hauled in before the elders. I had 600 kids show up to a youth event, which I thought was great. Like, isn't that a good thing? We like that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. No, they did not like that. Even though like we didn't break anything, there wasn't, we paid for every stuff, all that. It just did not go well. So I stepped out of that. I was like, okay, this isn't working. I need to like reset. It was another reset. And I went and visited a friend of mine's church. I was married by this point, a friend of mine's church that was growing rapidly. At that point, it was called Upper Oaks Community Church. It eventually became the Meeting House in Toronto. And I went there knowing it was growing fast. So I would just sit in the back corner and not, I knew they won't need me. But that really wasn't what happened. I got sucked in, became a part of the leadership. And that really, I would say, is when my leadership trajectory started. So then roll the clock forward a few years near the end of your time frame there. Wow. And by the time I was 26, we launched our first, or actually it was our second campus we had launched by the time I was 26. I thought I was so old and knew everything about launching. We went multi-site. The church went from less than 1,000 to multiple 4,000 or 5,000 people. But, by the time I was there, by the time we were late 30s, we were leading this thing, and thought all the old people out there, that were like 45, they didn't really know what they were doing. So that was kind of those early things that influenced my leadership for sure.
So content, church, love of church, innovation.
And yeah, I would say one of the life questions that I still wrestle with to this day, this is too much information. You can cut this out if you're not interested, but like a question that I still think about, which is, in moments so Canada, people don't wake up on Sunday morning and feel guilty for not going to church. This is increasingly the case in large swaths of America as well. You just church leader, leave your church on Sunday morning and go to Walmart. All of those people in Walmart are not thinking I really should be in church, like they're breaking a rule. They don't care. Right. It's like worse than if they felt guilty about it, that would be better. But they don't even think about it. Right. That has been my context. And so, and whether it was there in Canada or I was in New Jersey for a bunch of years, same thing there. People don't wake up and think, oh, I can't believe I'm not in church today. I'm being a rebel or whatever. That's not what they're thinking. And I have thought for a long time about moments of revival in communities, because I want to be a part of a place where like tons of people come to know Jesus. Like I want people to take steps towards him. And I've, asked the question, what happens in moments of great revival? Is it that the Lord really just loves those people more than the people in my community, right? Is it just that? That's obviously an unsatisfactory answer. That's not true. Now, there's a part of it, obviously, it is a move of God. So part of that is kind of true. Then on the other dissatisfactory answer, is it like in those times, like people were just really good at the new here card and were great at following up on announcements, and like they just were great communicators. They kind of had all their systems lined up, and that's why people came to know Jesus. Well, that's unsatisfactory. But it is also kind of true, right? Like they also were good at that. So over my entire their entire career, I really have been thinking about those two things, and really the conclusion I've come to, and it leads well into this best practices thing. Like there are some things that our churches do that are holding us back from reaching people. I just keep thinking, let's find the best practice, do those things, do them well, and then know that ultimately the Lord's going to do the long work in people's lives. But we don't want to do, if it's like literally, and I was literally talking to a church earlier this morning, a growing church, and they're kind of frustrated with some of that stuff. And like 3 questions of like standard things that they should be doing, they're not doing. I'm like, well, if you fix these 3 things, you'll reach more people. Like, and don't like, these are not like rocket sciencey kind of things. And so I've kind of been on a lifelong journey to say, okay, what are those things? How do we find those things that seem to be working in lots of places? That's why we started the podcast, talking to, we've done 800 some odd episodes. The books, all that stuff has really been in that kind of, I want to try to take as many of the practical problems out of the way as we possibly can. Yeah.
How many? So 800 podcasts. How many? Do you know how many blog posts you've done?
I think it's over 1,500. But you and I were texting about that recently, where Seth Godin got over 10,000. I was feeling great about my number, and then you see Seth Godin, you're like, I don't feel great anymore. Oh, wow. So it's a lot. I did weekly blog posts for years. We don't do weekly anymore. Now we do occasional. We do weekly podcasts though. Every week we do at least one podcast. And then occasionally a couple times a month we do new posts.
Well, you challenged me almost a decade ago to start writing 300 and 400 words, everything you do. And I think you said someday that'll become a PDF, and maybe that'll become an ebook, and it'll become a talk.
Yep.
And then you'll throw half of it away because you've learned something that's proven
more.
And then eventually you'll have a book.
Well, and this
that's like prophetic. That was like an 8-year prophetic.
Oh, that's encouraging. I do think that's true though. Like writing for me, this is why I think ChatGPT and all that could be potentially dangerous in people's lives. The process of writing is the process of thinking. It's like you've got to piece it all together, and I love, that's why I love your book. I love what you've done here. I think it's super helpful for people. We want to make sure people pick it up. It's going to be a great resource for them as they're wrestling with thinking through these issues. How do we pass this thing on to the next generation?
When did you get serious about Unseminary?
Well, so
I'm onto something. I'm onto something here. And basically the tagline is everything they didn't teach you in seminary or something like that.
Yeah. Which is wish they taught in seminary. Yeah.
Center of, if there's a target on the wall and leadership pathways trying to hit, it's that stuff.
Well, we got breaking news here. I have not really talked about this much, but because I love you so much, we're going to tell the story. The very first version of the blog wasn't Unseminary. My original name was Killer Church. This is true. Killer Church, like the idea of like, man, that's a killer church. You'd say that. Yeah. The art of execution in the local church, which I just was like, this is fantastic. Like, but turns out it's a little too edgy. Turns out you can be more clever than clear. And so we journeyed with that for a couple of years, and then struck on Unseminary, which I think it's not anti-seminary. It is it's just like, hey, here's,
That's right.
So, I would say it's been serious. It was a serious side hustle for a long time, like 15 years. Okay. And it's actually my wife. I don't know about you, Dave, but like, in my life, Christine, I'm sure it's with Kristen, that like the voice of Christine and the voice of the Lord are like very close together. They sound very similar in my life. Uh-huh. And for years I would, because of some of the multi-site stuff and the stuff we've been doing, I'd get hauled in to like speak at a conference, or when I was working at a church, or like, can you come and help us with this stuff? And every time I would do that, I would text her and I'd be like, I love this. Like there's like no greater joy. I would say stuff like that. And eventually she started pointing that out. She said, every time you go away, you come back and talk about how much you love this. She's like, why don't you figure out how to structure your life so you can do that full time? And so, that's been just the last couple of years has been full time. It's been really serious, I would say, for the last 8 or 9. Like it was a serious side hustle. And then the last couple of years has been full time.
All right. So if one of the 7 things, when we say one of the 7 things is best practice, because we need young leaders learning in the best places possible. One of the things when I'm speaking with an executive or senior pastor, and they'll say, we are thinking about residency and we'd like to start in this ministry because this ministry is weak and they need help. And we're like, well, that's not what we do.
That. Yeah.
Because if you think about it, if you multiply what you have, if you replicate, we're always thinking about who are we going to replicate on our team? Do you want to replicate the weak leader? Of course not. Right. No. So start with the strongest. Who's the person on the team that has shown they can build a team, build leaders, their ministry's moving forward. They're always innovating, coming up with something new.
That's good.
So give us then, what's an executive pastor looking for? And this, if there are any listening young people who want to go into ministry, what should they be looking for? And let's start with, say, kids ministry. Where do you go?
That's great. Well, for
church growth at Unseminary.
Yeah. Okay. So I would say, first of all, I just want to affirm this thinking. One of the things I realize, it's second nature to me because of what we do, but it's not second nature to every church leader out there. That like there are churches out there that have solved the problem that you are trying to solve, whatever that is. That's right. There's someone out there. You just have to go find them. That's really what Unseminary is. It's like, what have you done? Let's try to spread those ideas to other people. And so I love this idea. I use the word benchmarking or best practices. Like, what is the actual benchmark? And there are like real benchmarks. The number we've used, our friends at Unstuck, they look at this every single year across 1,000 prevailing churches. And they do, like, one of the things they do is they come up with percentages, because churches always ask, like, what percentage should we have in, say, kids ministry, your birth through elementary? This is an important number to look at, because if it's shrinking, that means your church is getting older. It means you have no future. And so you want to make sure that you sustain that. So their most recent number was at 16% of what they found in churches. So, and I've said in other contexts, 20% should be in that, kind of attending as a part of. So I would say, dear leader, if you're listening in and your church isn't at your kids ministry isn't at that level, it's not attracting, 16 to 20% of your audience isn't in kids ministry for whatever reason, then maybe you don't start with kids ministry for the place you want to send somebody. Now, if it is in that area, hey, that's fantastic. There must be something going on well there. Kids is an interesting area because it's, people will they'll sacrifice their own spiritual development for their kids. Yeah. They'll say like, hey, I'm going to go to this church that does a great job on kids ministry. I can listen to whoever, insert Dave Miller, I can listen to him online. I don't need to necessarily, get the, preaching or whatever. They'll make that decision. And so if your church is under that, if you're really struggling in that area, you're not, you're seeing turnover. You can, another way to look at it, all of these I like thinking about from a numeric point of view, because it's like hard to argue, you know, with numbers, you know, look at your kind of total overall attrition as a church, which is typically 15%. If churches don't study that number, it's oftentimes 15%. There's 5% of people, the lead pastor says something that pisses them off, they leave. That just happens every year. That should happen in your church. If it's not happening in your church, it's not, you're probably not teaching the Bible. You know, it's an offensive text. You read it and people get offended. That's what happens. 1 in 20 every year should leave you because you're like, you know, that isn't good. So there's another 5% just move because of like community, you know, like they move on or whatever. And then another 5% die, you know, they just aren't. So 15% generally. So I would look at, okay, let's look at your total attrition number and then look at your kids attrition number, the like kids people, and which one's higher? Is kids ministry adding people to your church or is it taking people away? Is that attrition higher there? If you want to get into a more, you know, nuanced number, that's an even better way to figure out, is this the kind of area where you want to send a resident?
It's great. No, that's great. How if a kids ministry is 15 or 16 to 20%, is that what you said?
Yep.
How do you look at team building and volunteers, and what are you looking at best practices in a kids ministry like that? Is there a best practice?
So typically the rule of thumb that it's a rule of thumb's too strong. The often trend I see is that 50% of the church's total volunteer base will be in kids ministry. Yeah. So, you know, the way you do that math is let's pick a church of 1,000, just because it's easy from a numbers point of view. Yeah. Church of 1,000 people. The benchmark we've seen is that church should have 30% of its attendees in serving on a team where they're serving at least quarterly. So they need to be doing something on a regular basis. Okay. Half of those are typically in kids ministry. So in a church of 1,000, that means your kids team should have 150 volunteers, something in that, somewhere around that range. This is one of those areas where it can become overstaffed really quickly, frankly, because executive pastors and lead pastors, they don't want to get involved. And so a kids ministry person comes to them and they're like, we're swamped. Yeah. And they're like, we need people. And then they don't ask the question of like, well, how many volunteers you have? Well, we have 50 volunteers. Well, okay, well, you don't have anywhere near to what you should. You know, you should in a church of 1,000 have somewhere close to 150. Yeah. And so let's start with building out your volunteer team. Now, my experience has actually been in prevailing church ministries or prevailing kids ministries. And you know, that's like you smell it when you smell it, you see it when you see it. You know, like go walk through the kids ministry, and I'll say to churches, like, look, are people smiling? Like, are people, you know, our kids, does it feel like the wheels are about to fly off in the nursery? Right. Or does it feel like, no, that's actually like, yeah, there might be kids crying or whatever, but it's like, no, that feels like a good thing. So you kind of get to smell that one a little bit. If it's prevailing, you know, they usually are volunteer machines. They're usually actually very good at that. This is an area where typically actually kids ministry can help the rest of the church, because whatever they're doing, usually they're doing an exceedingly good job, better than like student ministry or, you know, the guys in tech. They're like, they're terrible at, you know, kind of the default. They are usually pretty good at it.
Okay, so let's talk about the main core things you would say. So kids, what are the things that have to work, that are going to hold your church will be held back if these areas of your church are not on point? Kids.
Well, preeminent, but it doesn't really fit in to this conversation, is teaching. So 3/4 of the reason why people come to your church is because of the teaching. Now, I'll say this from a resident point of view. Like Dave, you know this, my son's a young buck. They've got him in on a great church, Sanctus Church in Toronto. You know, he's been working part-time for them. You know, they're trying to get him to work there full-time, all that stuff. He has said, oh, maybe I'll do teaching. I would like to do that someday. Yeah. You know, and I would say this is an area where it's like, if you have residents that are asking those kinds of questions, then I'd be thinking about how can we get them in the pipeline? What do we do to get them up in front of people? And let's, you know, whatever you do in sermon planning, like you go away and figure out the retreats, get your residents to show up and say to them, don't say anything. Just come and watch. And then, you know, or come with 5 ideas and give us, you know, like give them something like a task to do, but get them in the orbit of that, because it takes a lot of time in that area, as we all know. It doesn't just kind of magically happen. So teaching is preeminence, but it would be the typical stuff. So from there, Kids is really important. That is a growth engine. The musical worship piece is a growth engine. Connections. So it's the more than groups, I would say it's the moving people from the weekend through whatever the process is that you get people plugged into the church. That's actually, groups is an outcome from that. It's not. Yeah. And from a growth point of view,
talk about that for a minute. Let's talk about that, because I think there's very few, I don't know. There's a ton of great churches, right? But when you talk about how do you nurture people forward, how do they do that? What are some best practices for right now, not pre-COVID, not 2007, but I mean now, the way we all behave Monday through Friday? What are some best practices you're looking for?
So first of all, we'll set the kind of framework and then get into tactics. So I will get to a very nitty-gritty tactic, but the big learning on this whole next steps thing is, and this has definitely accelerated since COVID, is most churches have way more guests coming than they see sticking and staying. So like a stuck church is seeing the kind of the fun thing that a consultant says is the stuck churches are keeping 1 in 10 first-time guests. Growing churches are keeping 2 in 10, and the most like actively aggressive churches in the country are keeping 3 in 10. So what does that mean? You mean you have way more opportunity at the top end of the funnel as a church. Now, oftentimes we think about the back door, but the reason why we think about the back door is because those people are on a spreadsheet already. So they're in a group and they stop being in a group. They're donating, they stop donating. They're volunteering, they stop volunteering. And we think about those. But actually, when you look at the actual numbers, most churches have way more opportunity at the top end of the funnel to move those first-time guests and get them connected. And so, I think it's important to have really great steps at getting people into groups, but I would start as far up the funnel as possible, which is and this is that thing I was talking about that church earlier today. What do you say to guests every weekend? Why would they ever give you their contact information? And you've seen this before. It's not rocket science. It's hey, if you're new here, thanks so much for coming to St. Dave Miller Memorial Church. So glad you're here. We're just an honor that you're a part of our church. In fact, the fact that you're here this weekend is like a gift to us. It's incredible that you've come. And so we have a gift we'd love to give to you. It's a coffee mug. It's a, tumbler, a t-shirt, some sort of
almost anything.
Almost anything. The actual gift, and we prove this out in statistics, the actual gift matters less than we think in most of our minds. We're like, oh, it's got to be a perfect gift. No, you just need a gift. That's actually the most important thing. And you think about this. You go to a baseball game, people are giving away their social security numbers for a crappy t-shirt. It's the same thing. The language is what we call an ethical bribe. So we are ethically bribing people. We're going to give you this. What you're not saying is, if you'd like to get connected, if you want more information on the church, if you're thinking that you want to be a part of our family, first-time guests are not thinking any of those things. The question they're wondering is, am I ever going to come back here again? They're deciding, they're filtering, should I even come back? So don't assume that they're farther down. Say, hey, we'd just love to give you a gift in exchange for clicking the QR code, filling out the card in the seat in front of you. Take it out to our dedicated kiosk out in the lobby, where it's our New Here kiosk. We've got New Here volunteers. Give that to them. They'll give you that in exchange. Most churches should be averaging 2% documented first-time guests every single week in, week out. You should be averaging that. So 2%. A church, sticking with a church of 1,000, that's 20 every single week in, week out. That's baseline.
How many churches of 1,000 that you've come in and worked with or are seeing that, do you think? Documented 2%. That seems like a lot.
It's over a year that you end up with so 2% means over a year you end up with 1,000 guests. So most churches are not there. If they're not thinking about this area, they're not there. Now, churches that are doing all that stuff that we just talked about, there's a bunch of other stuff, but those, all of those steps, it's pretty typical that if we solve all those things, we can get them to close to 2%. Then it becomes invite culture. Because if it's under 2% and we're doing all of that stuff, then that's a different conversation. Then I would say you're not motivating your people to invite their friends. Your church should have a steady flow of new people coming in every.
Here's why this is important to Leadership Pathway. Let's pretend, Rich, we could find someone who wanted to be a communications, this kind of person, top of the funnel. Whether it's sort of all overlays in there. How we communicate, what are we doing, how are we following them?
Yep.
What are we going to help? What are we going to impress upon them between the ages of 20 and 25 of what's normal, of how we communicate and how we nurture people forward? It's really, really hard. It's a really, really hard conversation. I think a lot of us right now are caught in the staffing world post-COVID. We're caught in, well, all the communications people, you can't hire them anymore. They've tripled their salaries. They've gone to the marketplace. Everyone's outsourced everything, you know, and we're over here like, man, we have to put some 20 to 25-year-olds somewhere where they can learn how does best practices, nurturing, how we communicate in the modern times. And how does that play out on Sunday morning, let alone Monday through Friday for churches?
Well, there's huge opportunity for young leaders. I think there's huge opportunity in this area. And this is an area, frankly, I know we're not really talking to residents today, but I'll put it this way. This is an area where if you got the right resident involved and got them plugged in this whole kind of comms, what are we doing in this area, man, you could see huge difference in your church, and it'd be a real kind of co-learning. Hey, you're working with them. You could see great progress.
A digital native 23-year-old. Can you imagine?
Absolutely. And who is not afraid of all of that metric kind of thing. Like I am, shocked, maybe too strong of a word, but I am surprised still how many people, it's not magic what I just talked about. Like that every business, most businesses have some version of that funnel. Right. And they're moving people from, they might call them prospects or suspects, and they're moving them down, cultivating them through. But for whatever reason, churches, they don't, or I would say prevailing churches do worry about this. They're thinking about this, and they are leaning in. I was, with the church recently. They heard me say something like this on a podcast. They brought me to a church of 10,000 people. They brought me in and are like, we want to talk about that one thing for 2 days. Like, let's drill in on that. We want to understand. And then, they've set out to like make a whole bunch of changes, but it takes time. They're not a small church. It's like 6 months of like, hey, we're changing stuff in our lobby and figuring out that gift and all that stuff. But because they realize a church if they can get a 0.5% change in the number of documented first-time guests, that's huge for the church. That's huge opportunity there for sure.
And anyway. Okay. I want to talk about, and I want you to say it if you remember. You may not remember this conversation. It's been in the last couple of months. I said something about student ministries and best practices.
Okay. What did I say? What were we talking about?
Yeah, we were just talking about what are the things that have to work really well for a prevailing church. And I brought up, we went through worship production, communications, teaching, kids, first steps, next steps. I think I mentioned students. What did you say?
Well, so the interesting thing, there's going to be student ministry people who are going to hate me right now. I know this. But kids ministry grows a church. Student ministry sustains that growth. Right. It's really not a growth engine. Right. Now, I'm not saying that it's not important. Hear me, friends. Like, don't and send me the hate mail. Don't send Dave the hate mail. It's not that it's not important, but it is not. Students don't typically travel with their parents. Parents won't change churches and go to a different church because their kid changes to a different church. And so you don't see the kind of growth bump from students when they move over. Now, I think it's important that churches have prevailing student ministries. But I think that's more about seeding the future. That's more about the high school students of today, young adults of today. Those are going to be the 25 to 35-year-olds 10 years from now. And so it's like, we got to work hard now to learn. And, I remember this from years ago. I remember this is back in the olden days, back in the 1900s. I was at North Point. I don't know. Are we allowed to talk about North Point anymore? Sure. Yeah. And I remember Andy Stanley, we were at some conference, and he was talking about this issue, kind of a related issue. And he was joking. He said, like, all we're doing is well-funded student ministry for adults. Like, he was a student guy, kind of grew up through that, and now had the cash to be able to do what he was doing 10 years ago. That's really the value, I think, of student ministry. It's like, we got to figure out, what are we working with here? What's this generation like? And then how do we, how do we, so, what's that going to look like 10 years from now?
Well, people ask us about, I get asked about church planting residency. I'm like, yeah, we tried one once.
Right.
Residents become youth pastors become church planters, which will get me an email if they're still listening this far in.
Right.
Because people want to turn the ratchet on church planting residency. I'm like, just go down the hall. Those church planters are in front of 100 students or something, teaching every Thursday night and doing groups and doing guest services and beating their head against the wall about their worship and their video. And they're like little pastors.
Yeah. That's good. That's good.
Incubating. Ironically, Rich, a lot of senior pastors will immediately think interns, residents, youth ministry. They don't necessarily think about how do we grow the next comms director here, because we're never going to find one.
That's interesting.
They're almost impossible to find. So how can we just grow one here?
Right.
Whether they're 20 to 25 or their second career even.
Right. Interesting.
We have to grow what we need. And or in some communities, we have to grow more than we need because the church in our movement or across town or down the road, they can't, they're struggling to do it. So can we grow enough for them?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And that, I think I can see where there would be this tension of like, well, and a part of that could be the overstaffing thing is like kids ministry, and student ministry, there are areas where, and adult ministry kind of like groups people, all of those people, they are hungry for staff. Like they're constantly saying like, hey, we need to hire people. I would think your average lead pastor is cognizant of like, there is some cap on the comms department when, we're not going to have 10 people working in comms. That's not going to happen, but they would not be that confident about the same thing with kids ministry. They would, well, maybe we should have 10 staff, right? Maybe we should. And so it can become overstaffed, or maybe it is true. Like those guys do have a lot of coffees there in adult ministry. If we just hired some more, we could have people having more coffees with people. Or like worship ministry. Well, how many worship leaders do we need? We're not going to hire 10 of them. Like maybe we hire a few. Those other areas have caps to it where, which is an interesting sidebar, not really related to this, but like one of the death knells, particularly for this size church we're talking about, this 1,000-person church, which I know lots of churches that are smaller than that do residency. Yeah. But thinking about that size church, one of the death knells is they start to overstaff. It's the first time that a church says we can afford it, that they then have to ask the question, should we do it? It's the first time in their history. When they were 200, they couldn't afford anybody. They could barely afford the church planner. Yeah. But they get to 1,000 or so. Now they can afford it. They have to start asking the question, should. And if you don't change at that moment, you'll end up overstaffing. You stop doing Ephesians 4, which I know you guys are passionate about, the raising up, the equipping of people. We stop doing that work, and we're hiring doers, which again is terrible for our churches. One
more thing right there. When you're out coaching and consulting like you do, where are we from your perspective? Where you're embedded? Where are we in terms of how can I say this? People who want to earn a living. It's expensive to live, Rich.
Right.
And we used to just say, major metro areas. It's really expensive. No, it's expensive
everywhere.
I don't care where you're living and what you're doing. It costs a lot more money today than it did in 1998 to live, and yet salaries. And where are we? What do you see trends in terms of tying it to best practices for people and where they're learning how to do ministry? What do you see where you're embedded?
Well, so the two numbers that we come back to pretty consistently on that area is we talk about the staff to attendee ratio of the church. Okay. And the benchmark that's been out there for a long time, they used to say 1 to 100, which then I was like, I don't know any churches that are 1 to 100. And then when you do actual research, you realize, no, like churches that only end up at 1 to 100 are very large churches. Like you get up over 10,000, 20,000, maybe you have 100 or 200 staff at that point, you're able to do it. But actually 1 to 75 is a much better target for most churches to look at. At the same time, so you take that number and then you take the percentage of your overall budget that is associated to staff.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a bit more conversation around this out there. If people were to ask me, I would say I think 50% is a reasonable target for that number. That if you're spending less than 50% and you're 1 to 75, you're probably underpaying your team.
Right.
If you're at 1 to 75 and you're around 50%, you're at that, like you're right there. You probably have enough cash in the engine to be able to pay these people well. Now, what's even better is if you can grow that number, the per capita number, essentially have less staff but pay them better. That's like a philosophical decision that you have to make as a church, as a leadership team. Do we want to have less people? And I'm in that conversation. Oh man, every month, and when it gets to this issue, and you have to. It's a cognitive, like philosophical decision. No, we are going to, through attrition, the church is going to grow. We're not going to add people. We're going to put more cash and we're going to put more energy behind those people who can build volunteer teams. That's what it's about. We're going to, those people that can have more volunteers under them, that have more people, that are, those people, we're frankly just going to give them more money, and we're going to try to hire those. The other thing related, this is, it's a bit of a bugaboo of mine. I wish and this is not a best practice. Very few people, not enough churches do this. Can we please go to posting the range of this role on the whatever posting that's out there? Too many churches, it's like, I have no idea what they're paying. And they'll get 4 conversations in before they have that conversation. That's crazy. Then, which is nuts, right? You must have seen this when you were in your,
you'll see it all the time. All the time.
I'm like, let's just put that right up front. Just put the range, post it on your website. Don't be afraid. If you're afraid of what your people think about how much your staff make, that's a different issue. Like, that we got to, whether it's too little or too much, it's usually not too much. Right. If it's too little, you're afraid like, oh, your people are going to, you're not going to attract the right people. Like, can we please do that? I was literally talking to a leader yesterday who was encouraged. It was one of these, this is going to sound bad because it's self-congratulatory. He was like, man, I'm so glad you do that and done that in organizations. That's been so good for our organization, because we realized, oh my goodness, we're paying way under market. We're paying, if they go over there, they're going to make more money. And so, this is I'm from Canada, so people think we're communist, but this is one of those places where, like, that is a pro-labor stance. It's a pro-employee stance, to just be really clear on this is exactly how much we pay, which I think we should be as churches. We should be known as those people pay well rather than they don't pay enough. And so I don't know. There's a lot of random ideas there.
I think the week that I learned that people were reading what I wrote, it was your staff should make more.
Right. Yeah.
And man, I got on both sides of that. No one was posting publicly about it, but I was getting messages and texts. Some were saying, thank you for saying that. And then some were not as happy with me. But anyway.
I think any XP, I know there's a lot of, that's my lane, executive pastor lane. And I think we just have to have a very sober conversation around what it actually costs to like own a house, to get a mortgage, to, and look at what could these people be doing if they weren't doing this. What is the actual output value to their organization by like total volunteers and all that stuff? Let's have get some real numbers around it. And then again, it's not an overnight thing. My experience has been when churches make that decision to be like, we're going to have fewer people, pay them more. It's like a multi-year, 2 or 3 year process to go from where they are to like, oh no, actually we feel good about that. We feel, it's good.
It's great. Okay. Unseminary.com. I want to finish with, you talked about it right at the top when we started talking. You talked about this revival that's going on. Or is it a revival? I guess there's smart people that can argue that. Is it a revival? Is it a spiritual hunger, an awakening, a thing? The statistics are out. I even saw, where did I see? It was not Christian News Network. It was, I think, HBO Bill Maher, who I'm not saying people should watch that show. But he was on his panel. This is he's like, what do you make of all these kids going to church in the UK? the kids, and he starts rattling off the statistics that you and I read a lot about, the trends, and guys are leading the way. Okay, so it's undeniable there's something going on. 18 to 23-year-olds primarily in this country and evidently in the UK. Why? That's what I'm curious about.
Well, so I, just to echo that, and I'll actually, so it's funny you bring up this question. I've been collecting those news stories, and so I have about a half a dozen of them. I'll send them to you. I'll text them over to you if you're, so what you're saying is statistically absolutely true. The articles I love are like, I have them in a folder on my desk. So I was looking at it. The Economist, the title there was, "The West has stopped losing its religion." That's fantastic.
Yeah.
There's one from Vox. So Vox News, the title for theirs is "Gen Z is finding religion. Why?" Like, it's like, and it's true. I just want to underline this. The developmental, the popular assumed assumption was, as the world becomes more industrialized, it will become more secular. And that has been the trend since the start of the Industrial Revolution. That has been the trend. But that has turned around, and Gen Z is more religious, more faith-filled than millennials. It's the first time that has happened. So the first thing I would say is, but to the why question, I would say before we get to why, we have to pay attention to that, leaders. Like the environment that we are in, I think we have been handed. I was at a event recently with Nikki Gumbel from Alpha. It's like he's doing like a global tour right now of like literally saying, "This is the last time I'm going to this country." And so someone asked him this question: "Hey, like they rattled off all these statistics. What do you think about that?" And he sits back and kind of has this half laugh and says, "Well, that's what we've been praying for." Like, why are we shocked, friends? This is what we have been hoping for. But I don't want us to fumble this moment. I really do not want us to.
So good.
And so my concern is, when I think about this issue, is, man, we have got to do away, people like you and me, we got to give this thing off to the next generation. We've got to accelerate passing this thing off. We have to take bigger risks. I do think we have to do a better job on leadership development. You had said in passing conversation when you're on my podcast, and that has stuck with me, and sent me down a rabbit trail of research around the Jesus movement, the Japuza, Jesus People, USA. And why did that not become a bigger deal? Like and that's kind of the moment we're in. We're in a similar moment like that. And the question is, I think a part of that was because the folks that will look to embrace that didn't move fast enough. We didn't move fast enough to bring on those leaders, to take the risk, to give them money, to say, "Hey, like, it was hard for us to make this thing happen. We want to make it easier for you. I don't want to, shouldn't have to go through a hazing ceremony to become a pastor. You shouldn't have to." And you know what? We're going to make a bunch of mistakes, and that's okay. If Silicon Valley, which is, is again globally unique around its ability to create shareholder value, the core of what's happened at Silicon Valley in that world, the core cultural phenomena there has been an embracing of mistakes, an embracing of it's okay if things go sideways. In fact, let's move fast and break things is a thing they say all the time. I'm not saying we should necessarily break stuff, but can we at least let the 23-year-old have a budget of a few $1,000s to try something, and give them some actual responsibility, or surrounded with, this sounds like a residency is what it sounds like, surrounded with adults who are there to help them, and people who, when it goes sideways, they can stand up with the person and say, "Hey, I was the one that said it was okay that they tried that. It was a bomb because I didn't give them enough support. I didn't
ownership.
I should have helped them. I should have given them more support." What they did right, dear 22-year-old, was they tried something new. The thing we should take from this was, what's the next thing we're going to try? So don't get me started on that. That's a passion piece I've been thinking about recently.
We need not be afraid of that generation.
Not at all.
We definitely should be afraid of my generation and my peers, because we've spectacularly blown it, put it in the ditch.
100%.
I mean, it's my peers. It's not this age group.
That we live in an increasingly the other thing, this is an unformed idea. You actually hit me on like a blog post I've been working on. We live in and another undeniable, sociologically proven thing is we live in an increasingly fast-paced, changed environment. If it feels like things change faster now than they have in the past, that's actually true. There's all kinds of evidence of that, there's a rapid change. You and I and our seniors, I was born in 1974, the lowest birth rate year of the 20th century. I am classic bust. I am Gen X as it comes. Like, I am right down the middle of the Gen X bell curve. I think Bono is going to be singing worship. I still like, I don't know, like
Coldplay.
Yeah, Coldplay or all that. That's me. That is me. That is who I am. Our generation, we have a harder time dealing with change than the people before us. Sure. Of course, we should be excited by the fact that the youngest generation, who is so used to dealing with change, they're coming back to Jesus faster. What we need to do is say, okay, how do we give this whole thing over to you? Let you take the ball and run with it. Which frankly is what happened when I was, it goes back to the story at the beginning. The people who trusted me when I was 23, 24, 25, 26 had no business doing that. They that was dumb. But what came out of that was the multi-site church movement. We raised a bunch of money, launched a bunch of locations, reached thousands of people because they were willing to take a risk. And man, we want to do the same thing we should be doing the same thing. I think what you're doing in Leadership Pathway is a great framework to be a part of that.
That's right. I love it. Rich, I love your energy. Unseminary, I send people to it. Gosh, if not every week, it feels like every day, but at least every week.
That's kind of you.
And just asking the same. They're asking your classic kind of resource to help us avoid the mistakes of the past. Like if you want to launch a campus, or you want to launch your 5th campus, or what are the prevailing? What are the 10 mistakes to avoid of doing the same thing we've been doing for 20 years? I think that website is gold.
Oh, that's kind of you. Kind of you.
Check out unseminary.com. Check out, I'll drop the link there for this PDF you can grab, which is chapter 3 of a book that will be out soon. All about how to find and support, and just what you just said. How do we come around this generation, support them, and set them free to do what it is that Jesus has for them to do.
So
to
fun.
Reach their peers.
Great seeing you, man.
Okay.